Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Maria Luisa Fantapié, and I'm the head of the Middle East, Mediterranean, and Africa program at the Institute for International Affairs in Rome. YAI is a Rome-based think tank who started from the 50s. We worked to be really a hub for policy making, but also for dialogue and academic research at the same time. Within the context of our program, Middle East program, we have obviously focused over the past 2 years on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And within this framework, we decided to host this interesting webinar on the implications that the recent legislation passed by the Knesset have and will have on the ability of UNRWA to work in Gaza and beyond. To discuss this, I'm really pleased to introduce a very excellent and distinguished set of panelists. We have with us joining today Marta Lorenzo, who is the director of the UNRWA office in Europe. Ines Abdulrazak, who's the director of the Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy, Raja Khalidi, director of Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, and Riccardo Bocco, who is professor emeritus at the Geneva Graduate Institute. We will have first Marta Lorenzo providing some introductory remarks, and then we will have each panelist intervening for about 8 minutes, and then we will open the session for question and answer. Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria Luisa, and good afternoon to all that are listening, distinguished panelists, and thank you for the invitation. I wanted to say much more than what I could say in 8 minutes, but that is not going to be possible. And therefore, before introducing what the Knesset legislation is, I want to speak about what's happening on the ground. We cannot understand the Knesset legislation if we don't understand what's going on in reality, and if we don't understand what the mandate of the agency is. And of course, after 15 months of war in Gaza, displaced people are returning to rubble, literally to rubble, mountains of rubble, struggling to survive. What my colleagues tell me about Gaza right now is that the living conditions are inhumane. And I would say that while our focus, understandably, is on Gaza and on the fragile ceasefire and the release of hostages, we should not overlook the situation in the West Bank. Because what is happening in the West Bank is that we are experiencing levels of violence and forced displacement that we have not seen since 1967. So why I wanted to start like this? I wanted to start like this because we have to be clear. What we are witnessing is the alteration of the paradigm of Palestinian presence and livelihoods in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, with likely irreversible consequences. And UNRWA is a part of it. That's why I wanted to, in a way, frame what is happening to UNRWA within a wider context of forced displacement, dispossession, loss of livelihoods. And at a time in which we should be scaling up humanitarian assistance, resuming education, restoring critical public services in Gaza, UNRWA, which is the largest humanitarian agency in the Gaza Strip, operating for more than 75 years, and a key development in the region, is at an existential risk. 2 anti-UNRWA bills with a clear political intent to alter the agency's mandate have entered into force on the 30th of January, significantly impacting our operational capacity. This has been accompanied by what we call a harsh disinformation and misinformation campaign to discredit our life-saving work. And despite these laws, UNRWA remains committed to delivering life-saving and basic services. I'm saying this because on the 30th of January, we knew that the Knesset legislation had entered into force, yet we took the decision to stay and deliver. And we did that not thinking just of UNRWA, but thinking of the millions of people that depend on our assistance. The ceasefire, as you know, has given us some hopes, but it's still very fragile, tensions are very high, and we have witnessed the determination of people in Gaza trying to return to their homes. And it's very hard to imagine how the targets of the ceasefire will be maintained without UNRWA. And just to give you a little bit the scale, right now we have 10,000 colleagues in Gaza contributing to the humanitarian response. What is the humanitarian response? It's not just distributing bags of flour, which we do. And by the way, we have reached 1.5 million people with food aid since the ceasefire entered into force. But it is maintaining basic services, including primary health care and education. And I keep on repeating that the enjoyment of rights is not something that we can selectively choose. I choose to do right to food and right to water, but I don't choose right to primary health care or right to education. I have to say that there has been very little attention to children's right to education, and in Gaza we have over 600,000 girls and boys now out of school that have lost 2 years of education. And even in the middle of the active conflict, I can tell you that we had almost 200,000 children learning online. So this is the value of education that people in Gaza give, and we should not deny the right to education. There is no other UN agency, no other humanitarian actor in Gaza, other than a functioning Palestinian state, that can run an education system right now. I want to turn to the situation of the West Bank very, very briefly, because it is unprecedented. I refer to 1967, the pattern of displacement. In the last few weeks, we have seen major military operations in the West Bank, the devastation of 4 refugee camps, Jenin, Tulkarem, Nur el-Shams. More than 40,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced. But I think what it is important is not only that people have been displaced, but that the destruction that is happening is extensive and systematic, leaving camps inhabitable with residents unable to return to their homes. And when people are forced to leave their homes and lose their means of livelihoods, the consequences are far-reaching. Back to the Knesset legislation, and on the 30th of January, I already told you that the implementation of the Knesset legislation posed a new challenge. One of the bills bans UNRWA from operating in what Israel calls the sovereign territory of Israel, and that includes East Jerusalem, where we have health centers, where we have schools, while the other bill enforces a no-contact policy between Israel and UNRWA. The latter is the one that impacts our operations in the West Bank and Gaza. With no contact, it means that basically we cannot coordinate the entry of supplies into the Gaza Strip. And let's suppose, for example, that the ceasefire does not hold, we will not be able to do deconfliction. We will not be able to guarantee the security of our There are lots of arguments on whether UNRWA is replaceable or irreplaceable, but perhaps I should say the obvious, which is the UNRWA's mandate. Is a mandate that has been granted to us back in 1949 by the General Assembly. And it's only the General Assembly that can alter this mandate, and never a unilateral country. The government of Israel claims that UNRWA services can be transferred to other entities, and it is true that maybe other entities can distribute food or can distribute water, but the agency's mandate to provide public-like services to an entire population, including education, this is what it cannot be replaced, unless it is being done by a state. Our capacity to directly provide primary healthcare services for millions of Palestinians, to resume education, as I have said. The government of Israel also claims that UNRWA plays a minor role in providing humanitarian assistance, but I just told you what we do. And I think what is less quantifiable, but equally critical, especially in the ceasefire context, is UNRWA's contribution to human development, to a political transition, and community acceptance. Palestinians know and trust UNRWA. We have been there for 75 years. The Knesset legislation is in total contradiction to international law obligations of UN member states, including the State of Israel, which is bound by the General Convention on Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. And we should not take this lightly. Any changes to UNRWA's mandate, as I said before, can only be determined by the UN General Assembly. And when UN organizations become war targets, and unfortunately UNRWA has become a war target, consequences are far-reaching. These are not just attacks on UNRWA, these are attacks on the UN Charter, on international law and international humanitarian law, all that guide humanitarian action all over the world. And this conflict and how the international community is responding to it changes the very foundations of how conflicts are solved. So it's all about choices. And of course, we have a clear choice before us, one in which we allow UNRWA to implode due to the Knesset legislation, because gradually we might not be able to operate, or gradually donors will continue suspending funding or hesitate on whether they should fund UNRWA. But the repercussions of these implosions, we should not lie to ourselves, will not be confined just to national borders, to Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, will contribute to further destabilize the region. Alternatively, we have another choice, and that is to allow the agency to progressively conclude its mandate within the framework of an agreed-upon political process. And we should not forget that UNRWA was always meant to be temporary. In fact, our mandate is renewed every 3 years. So it's not a time for ambiguity. I think we have to talk loud and clear, not for the sake of UNRWA, but for the sake of the Palestinians, both in Palestine and in the region. Of course, we need the ceasefire to hold with the release of all hostages. Of course, we need to provide humanitarian assistance according to humanitarian standards, and I want to mention this particular word, and not just what's allowed. And of course, we want to see the reversal of the deterioration situation in the West Bank. Forced displacements and violence must stop. We should stop that as soon as possible. And we need to counter unilateral action to prevent UNRWA and indeed any other humanitarian organization from delivering their mandate. I was hearing the other day the Protection Consortium in Palestine, in which they were mentioning that none of the NGOs that were part of the consortium have visas to stay in Israel. So it is not just UNRWA being targeted. We might be the most obvious, the most visible, but we are not the only one. And we, of course, need a political transition that allows for Palestinians and Israelis alike to live in peace and security. And within this transition, UNRWA should be allowed to hand over its public-like services in an orderly manner to an empowered and prepared Palestinian institution. Let me conclude by saying just one more time, because many of the conversations that we are having are technical humanitarian conversations. And I want to tell all of you that humanitarian aid alone is not enough to halt the changes that we are witnessing. The choices made today by states, institutions, donors, people like you will shape the future of millions and determine whether we allow these irreversible actions to take hold. We cannot let the unacceptable become a new norm, and the more the rules-based system is eroded, and I'm sure you will hear from other speakers, the more we lose on our collective humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta, for this introductory remarks. And I think you mentioned an important key word that is irreversible. So starting from this key word, irreversible, I will move to my second speaker, Professor Riccardo Bocco. And I would like, Ricardo, I mean, if you could share with us, first of all, how do you see this specific moment for the agency? You have like worked for a long time as an academic on the agency, but also how you see the changes that have been undergoing in relation to the potential obstacles that will be put in place maybe that will diminish the ability of UNRWA to operate. What type of impact this will have really on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and on the ability also of the Palestinians to remain in their land. Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you for inviting me. I will say that reverting back to the history of UNRWA and its very beginning is crucial and very relevant to understand today's situation. Why? In December 1948, the United Nations promulgated a resolution, this famous resolution 194, related to the right of return and or compensation for the Palestinian refugees. This resolution has never been put into practice over the past 75 years. Now, what happened is that during 1949, the United Nations set up a commission headed by Gordon Clapp, the famous director of the Tennessee Valley Authority, to make a proposal for the situation of the refugees. Actually, Gordon Clapp had a plan which was to resettle the refugees in the countries where they had fled. We are talking about at the time between 700 and 750,000 refugees. Now, this policy of resettling the refugees was opposed not only by the Arab states, but also by the refugee committees that had been formed at the time. Why? This was in virtue of the fact that they had the right of return. And Israel never accepted this, even if, for being admitted to the United Nations, officially Israel had to comply with the resolution 194. And when Israel was admitted to the United Nations, mainly through the United States maneuvering, at the time the United Nations was less than 60 members, to accept Israel notwithstanding the non-application of Resolution 194, UNRWA was created. And it was created as a temporary agency to provide humanitarian aid. Also a little bit more than that, because in the acronym of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the word works should be read as development, because the plan originally of UNRWA was to set up important agricultural development plans as a means to resettle the refugees and contribute to their integration in the countries where they stay, where they got refuge. UNRWA was mandated to cover 5 fields, namely West Bank, Gaza, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, where most refugees had fled. But it was not given an official protection mandate. UNRWA set up over time strategies for protection of Palestinian refugees. But formally, the refugees are the only refugee group worldwide that doesn't have a juridical protection from an agency like UNRWA or others. There is also an important point to make, that UNRWA was not mandated to deal politically, to find a solution, a political solution to the conflict. There was another agency, United Nations Conciliation Commission for Palestine, that was tasked with that. But the UNCCP was not given the means to implement its mandate. It still exists. They have an office in New York and another one in Vienna. And actually, they have been very active in collecting all the data concerning the Palestinian properties before 1948. During this year, they will be published online, by the way. So, to go back to the point and why the origins of UNRWA are relevant to understand today, is that basically the position of Israel hasn't changed. International donors have not been taking a political decision concerning how to apply Resolution 194. More than that, I would say that the responsible of the present chaos for the past 75 years have been mainly Europe and the United States, who basically have made the Israeli think that they are above international law. This situation is not surprising if we see what is happening today, as Mrs. Lorenzo has very well explained. But I would say when UNRWA officially began its work in May 1951, but by the end of the 50s, UNRWA decided to give away on the programs of agricultural development. And actually, they concentrated on three main sectors, which is the education, healthcare, and social services. And the budget and the employees of UNRWA correspond to these three main items, meaning that 2/3 of the personnel and the budget has been going to education, more than 25% to healthcare, and the rest to social services and infrastructure. The structure of the budget and how it was used follows this pattern until today. Now, the point is that doing away with UNRWA, what does it mean? It means that, first of all, UNRWA is mandated with its humanitarian mandate until a political solution is found, and therefore they can begin to, let's say, leave the field. But let's take into account that millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every year have been given to the host states and to the Palestinian Authority for Gaza and the West Bank. Meaning that if you delete UNRWA, who will be replacing in terms of personnel, of money? I mean, all the schools of UNRWA. Who will take over the schools of UNRWA and its personnel, the clinics, the nurses, the medical and paramedical staff, etc., etc. So there is no plan to replace, take Gaza. If you want to have another agency playing the role of UNRWA, who will they employ? The Palestinians of Gaza. Nobody, no other agencies can bring in international staff. The Israelis will not let them get in. So when I was saying it's important to go back to the origins of UNRWA, is to say in a nutshell that the situation didn't change. If not, I would say it got worse and worse. And this is the horrible situation in which we found ourselves today, and the incapacity of the Western donors and decision makers to find the solution is contributing to making the international order set up after 1945 falling apart, because international law doesn't seem anymore to be the criteria that would guide the world, if not securing peace and development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Riccardo, for these insights that really brought us back in time to understand the genesis of the mandate of UNRWA. And I think both Marta and Riccardo have also mentioned an element that I think will come up also in the Q&A about how replaceable UNRWA is, because many of the proponents of this idea that UNRWA actually can, I mean, there will many of those who think that UNRWA, I mean, work if impacted, nothing will happen because other agencies will step in. Say that exactly that other UN agency can step in, and how, I mean, so this is something that actually, as you pointed out, is not as easy as it looks like actually, and also there is obviously a political dimension to it because of if nobody is there to provide those services, that also will create a situation that will pressure even more displacement to take place. To continue our conversation, I will hand over the floor to Raja Khalidi, and I would like maybe you to also give us a perspective really on an assessment of the on UNRWA work from a socio-economic perspective, really, and its impact on the Palestinian society. And from your standpoint, how do you see this? And please, the floor is yours.
Okay, let me actually, my focus will also be on some of the results of the work that we did at MAS over a few years with Professor McDumper and a large group of civil society experts on the sustainable financing of UNRWA, which I think, you know, okay, maybe in the immediate, in the light of the immediate challenges, is not an urgent question. However, I think that what we did there was to try and engage Palestinian refugee perspectives in order to enhance a little bit Palestinian agency in the whole discussion about the financing of UNRWA, which, you know, is going to come back and hit us with a vengeance. But I would preface that by just firstly, I wrote it down before when you mentioned irreversible, irreplaceable. So I mean, there's no doubt that UNRWA is irreplaceable as an international agency and as a service provider within the broader Palestinian social service or safe social welfare network. Obviously, education, it's, you know, a leading element component of the Palestinian educational system, and we know produces qualitatively, you know, and consistently good educational outcomes in terms of health, in terms of shelter, in terms of relief. And now in Gaza, I think, you know, I didn't want to talk, and I don't think we can easily talk about which way things will go in Gaza regarding UNRWA and the inability to operate. But in normal circumstances, in the absence of an Israeli and global sanctions of the sort that we're worried about, UNRWA should be the reconstruction agency. And in fact, what Riccardo said about the original mandate, today, Gaza is exactly, it's where an agency that can link relief and works is needed you know, we're going to have to create one, but maybe we shouldn't have to create one, since we could actually entrust so much of this work, including the reconstruction, but you know, and employment of refugees in that process, and all of that through an agency like UNRWA. So I mean, I would add that to our thinking about the future. There's no other Palestinian or UN agency that's capable of providing such services, which are really a core function of and this is a core functioning part of the Palestinian social welfare safety net. And you know, it's actually, we have a Palestinian international civil service. I mean, because we know that UNRWA works according to international civil service standards. So this is a, you know, it's an asset for Palestine, which we cannot, you know, allow to be in any way degraded. Now, in the work that we did prior to the war, one important aspect of Palestinian refugee perspectives about funding is that the predominant view is that, among many refugees, is that the Middle East peace process, or the impact of the Middle East peace process in the last 20, 30 years on the specific refugee question has been, in effect, to marginalize it. With many refugees perceiving the search for a just solution to their plight as having been replaced by the quest for the establishment of a Palestinian state. So there's this attitude or perception, and I think it's not simply a perception; it's a reality. Nevertheless, given the alternatives and despite the limitations on UNRWA's ability to advance a durable solution that achieves Palestine refugee rights, the agency remains the only international body positioned to safeguard those rights by embodying them in the humanitarian services it provides, pending, as repeatedly reaffirmed by the UN, the achievement of a just solution to their plight. Indeed, Israeli and other disclaimers of Palestinian refugee rights target an end to UNRWA services, and this was well before 23, as meaning an end to any refugee status for any of the estimated 7 million Palestinians around the world. So UNRWA's status goes way beyond that of just a humanitarian service provider and cannot escape its symbiotic relation to the Palestinian refugee question itself. In some refugee quarters, the fact that UNRWA is not mandated to advance a political solution has led to demands that UNRWA's operational mandate should be amended in order to assign it a role in the international community's search for durable solutions. Now, our own research and deliberations suggest that such demands should be viewed with caution, as there are too many pitfalls and drawbacks in the current political environment, openly hostile or indifferent to Palestinian aspirations. And given that the renewal of the mandate has to some extent become almost automatic, the most that might be hoped for in the current ambiguous political climate is to ensure that first, UNRWA's mandate is simply renewed, and second, that the donor states are encouraged to interpret that mandate more positively in favor of promoting durable solutions, with UNRWA being given a greater role in doing so. Now, the degree to which Palestine refugees receiving UNRWA services recognize the financial and political challenges facing UNRWA is the subject of some debate. We know about recurrent strikes by UNRWA staff, even during the war, I believe, in Lebanon, which heightened the gap in priorities of those identified by UNRWA senior management and the refugees themselves. The strikes also made clear that there was considerable anger among Palestine refugees who perceive that the international community, as symbolized, embodied by UNRWA, has actually eroded the scope of services to refugees over the decades. Nevertheless, in some refugee quarters, there are calls for opportunities to be grasped that may mitigate the impact of these challenges. For example, activists and legal experts in the refugee community point to the growing international legal consensus regarding the discriminatory policies applied by the Israeli occupation authorities. They highlight that the International Court of Justice has declared Israel's actions as this was again before the war, tantamount to de facto annexation, etc., etc. The significance of the shift from occupation law to focusing on prolonged occupation, settler colonialism, or apartheid, and now genocide, provides, and I think this is even more so today, an opening for donor states to reassess the overly cautious and timid funding priorities, which have resulted in the prioritization of humanitarian aid while remaining silent on advancing Palestine refugee rights. And I believe that in the current political moment, this is maybe a moment where this refugee rights issue can be forcefully reimposed into the negotiating or the political process agenda. Now, as for the need for predictable income to ensure that the agency is given the means to plan and operate efficiently in the form of multi-year funding commitment, there's also, by donor states, there's also various viewpoints about this. One view sees such multi-year commitments as running the very serious risk of regularizing or normalizing displacement and refugeehood, and thus reducing its salience on the international agenda. Another view sees multi-year agreements as essential mechanisms for tying the international community more closely to the refugee issue pending a political solution. Now, on the question of UNRWA neutrality, I think we all know that there's a strong concern that donor sensitivities have distracted from a much more appropriate and effective articulation of Israel's responsibility for Palestinian displacement and the continuation of their exile. And this framing equates the position of Israel as a colonizer with those of dispossessed Palestine refugees. So the concept of neutrality is often seen by the refugee community as a violation of their right to express their national identity, including their right as refugees to return to their homeland. Now, finally, I just want to add two more points. The research by Mass that we've done on alternative financing mechanisms, which, we've confirmed that there are some good ideas out there. But there's an understanding, I think, in the refugee communities and Palestinian civil society that none of the options of refinancing UNRWA that have been examined in our project are really game changers. Things like corporate loans and donations, a World Bank loan, zakat donations, a waqf, the green economy. These are some of the ideas for generating additional income. They're all, urgently needed, but they are the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Even if these options meet the hoped for targets, they will supplement rather than replace the existing model of UN member states, voluntary contributions being the core of UNRWA funding. And for Palestinians, this constant engagement with the member states is important politically. And in this context, therefore, a Palestine refugee perspective on the financing of UNRWA would call for a twin-track approach. Yes, look for alternative sources of funding to supplement the existing model, but at the same time, also consider seriously other longer-term strategies that would obviate the necessity of UNRWA to be continually searching to cover its growing budgetary shortfall. Ricardo mentioned the UNCCP. I think the idea of resuscitating its functions, identifying refugee assets, exploring the potential of the Global Compact on Refugees, and such a commitment to such innovative activities would go a long way to reassuring Palestine refugee communities that their future is being taken seriously and not simply being shelved as a problem, which the international community hopes will go away. So those were some of the perspectives that we gauged prior to the war, and I think that now, of course, they have been mainly amplified. And in fact, as I mentioned, perhaps the current climate globally has opened options, including in the global south, including with countries that want to make that make some sort of compensation to the Palestinian people for what's happened, and to ensure that the people of Gaza recover sooner rather than later. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And I just a quick follow-up question. Can you share with all our audience the
webpage? Yeah.
No,
the
but also like the methodology and where, I mean, the way in which you have conducted your research and in which area exactly.
Well, I'll put the link to our page, because this is something we did in 2021, 2021, 22, and 23, and there was different stages of coming up with these conclusions.
And
so
I will also ask.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, that will be great. Thank you so much. And you give us a very comprehensive viewpoint from the ground, really, on how this is perceived by Palestinians, and but you also pointed out to a very important recommendations on how the international community could react, and on this specific point, I will hand over the floor to Ines Abdulrazak. Ines, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will just briefly comment on the many things that already have been said about the importance, and I think the crisis, and I think the urgency of the moment for UNRWA. Myself, I wouldn't be here without UNRWA, because my dad grew up as a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, and he went to UNRWA school. He graduated from an UNRWA school. So, I'm here also because, UNRWA supported Palestinian refugees when my family was forced out of Palestine in 1948. So I think that, we really cannot understand what's happening now without understanding that the attack on UNRWA, the attempt to really destroy and basically first marginalize and then undermine and smear and destroy UNRWA is part and parcel of Israeli colonial project. UNRWA is disturbing for Israel because, as it was reminded, it effectively protects the right of return of the Palestinians. And what the Israelis have been wanting for many, many years, and with now the support of the US, and again, it's not after October, this was, cooking for many years, is to effectively try and make the right of the Palestinians something negotiable, the right of return. And I think this is, again, not new, because we've seen in the past decades how Israel is creating facts on the ground, whether it's, the settlements, the Palestinian fragmentation, the takeover of the land, etc., and make them then like a new reality that has to be negotiated instead of, something that we should push and pressure to end. So while the international law, the UN system continues to kind of hold on certain principles when it comes to effectively reminding that, we have the right to self-determination, that we have the right to return, that that the occupation should end. The politics and the reality on the ground is that no one has the political will, and no one is bringing forward what needs to be done, which is effectively confronting Israel into ending its illegal occupation of Palestine, and it's to allow people to return to their homes. It should be very simple, that the Palestinians have a homeland and they just should be able to return. And I think, like, UNRWA, again, was not meant to last that long, and the only just way to, actually end the mandate of UNRWA is to really implement the right to self-determination of the Palestinians and the right of return of the refugees. And so I think it's not just around UNRWA. I think UNRWA is a big, very important target that the Israelis have chosen to try and undermine Palestinian rights that have very dire consequences, as it was said, directly on the millions of lives of people day to day, with like how they can actually effectively survive and have like the basic services for their life and livelihoods. But I think it needs to be understood more widely. And I think to give you a few examples, I think in the past years, I would not actually detach it from the narrative that has, again, the narrative has very big impact on politics. So the attack on UNRWA started also with the attack on the school books. And these attacks continue until today. And these attacks are linked to the fact that Israel is trying to portray Palestinians as either terrorists or anti-Semites. And I think this has been a push in the narrative that has not always been actually the case in Palestinian history and in the history of Zionism and Zionist colonial colonization of Palestine and so on. But I think it's important to understand, because it's what is driving effectively today countries in Europe and Western countries to divest and to end their support to UNRWA, is around that narrative, around the fact that we Palestinians would be effectively all terrorists, and that agencies like UNRWA would support that terrorism. And so that narrative is, again, not new. I think this is something that has been even championed by Netanyahu. If you see the history of the narrative and the discourse on the war on terror, even before 9/11, and even before the US became the champion of abusing and using that framing and that very political framing to attack many places in the region, and to again undermine Palestinian rights and to dehumanize and to smear Palestinians. Netanyahu and Israel had started way before, and they championed that kind of narrative that basically, you know, the Palestinians in their struggle effectively, you know, are terrorists, and then came also the push around the redefinition of anti-Semitism and the entire narrative around anti-Semitism. And again, all of that is not, it has not always been the case. This has been a construct, has been a narrative that has been built on, constructed, and a strategy that has been pursued around specifically targeting very specific things like the school textbooks in order to get to the donors to the agency, and the donors to also the education system more broadly, to the Palestinian Authority, because now there is this attack against the education system overall, not just UNRWA schools, in order to undermine the you know, the aid system overall. And the same happens with, again, the strategy around using the redefinition of anti-Semitism. There is this definition of anti-Semitism by the this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, known as IHRA, a definition that has used as examples like boycotting Israel, like calling Israel an apartheid state, and trying to have many countries and institutions endorse such definition to criminalize then everyone who's calling either for boycott or is effectively, you know, saying that there is an apartheid here. In order, again, to directly target the financial support and the partnerships between international institutions and Palestine. And effectively, we're here today where it has worked to some extent, because you're seeing a lot of what we call the shrinking space, right? That space for us to organize, for the agencies like UNRWA to operate, for the Palestinian Authority schools to operate. All of this Palestinian life and Palestinian existence is threatened to be cut off from its international partners, and effectively its space shrinking, because they've been attacking the, you know, specific elements that would then, you know, pressure internationally the donors and the partners to effectively remove their support. And I would say that this is very unfortunate, because effectively what we're seeing is that multiple parliaments around the world, governments are buying into those lies, are buying into those narratives. And what effectively it shows is that until today, Israel and the Israeli authorities are seen as a good faith actors. They are pouring tons and tons of fabricated elements, of fabricated truths, of fabricated allegations, flooding the, you know, foreign capitals with those types of reports and documents that are then, you know, not verified at all. But that's the strategy: flood them with information, flood them with lies, flood them with fabricated information. The damage is done. Why? Because they're taken seriously. There is effectively, the European Union has spent couple of 100,000 into paying a consultancy firm to look into the Palestinian textbooks, because an Israeli, you know, pro-Israel lobby in Brussels has accused the textbooks and has lobbied multiple parliamentarians over and over again. And so the response of the international community and institutions is to believe, is to take on those fabrications as potential truth. Which means that as Palestinians, we're kind of, you know, proven guilty before, you know, we are charged. And so I think there is a presumption of guilt, whereas for the Israelis, there's a presumption of innocence and of good faith and of trustworthiness. And I think that's the power dynamic we're in, which is very problematic, because again, I think the Israeli authorities are known for their bad faith, and they're known for disinformation tactics that UNRWA has been one of the main targets of. And so I think the primary focus here should be, one, to start fighting that disinformation and this systematic disinformation, to really have like internationals start to realize that the Israeli authorities and the Israeli actors that are coming after UNRWA and the NGOs and the civil society and the textbooks and the schools are effectively of bad faith and fabricating truth. I think that, you know, in the West, like there is that perception with China and Russia. There is never that perception with Israel. Why? So I think that's very important. The second thing is, I think that the international community should really pay attention to the demise of the aid system that goes with obviously the demise of the multilateral system. What we are seeing in Gaza is effectively a model that is, again, not new, because we've seen it in Iraq, in Afghanistan, but the privatization of aid and the weaponization of aid, all of what we're talking about against the replacement of UNRWA, it's also because what we're seeing on the ground is, you know, private NGOs that, yes, have a good capacity, but they don't have the oversight and the accountability mechanisms that, you know, UN agencies and other existing mechanisms have. Again, with their default. I mean, I don't think the aid system as it is I think is you know, free of criticism. But I do think that what we've seen in Gaza with, you know, experiences like with the World Central Kitchen, again, not a bad NGO in itself, but I think the fact that the World Central Kitchen was funded by the UAE, you know, was directly coordinating with the Israeli authorities and was operating as a private actor with private actors on the ground. That is dangerous, because that means that the oversight and accountability is with private actors that can be controlled by foreign actors. And again, it strips Palestinians from their agencies. So, and today we're seeing, you know, already US private security firms on the ground after the ceasefire. All of these are very tangible, serious developments that need to be taken into account, because it really is dangerous for Palestinian self-determination.
Thank you very much, Ines. So the first question relates to the links, the supposed links between like Hamas and UNRWA, and I think that this is a very important question, because which probably, Marta, you have been asked millions or thousands of times. So I would leave the floor to you, and then to also Raja, who has volunteered to answer this. And also within this question, there is a second element, which I think it's an important element, which relates more to the part of the potential solution at this stage, which is whether UNRWA could actually cooperate with their other agencies as a way to reestablish its reputation, and therefore then, you know, that would allow to continue its work. So Marta, and then Raja, over to you. Marta,
thank you. I'll try to answer the questions on links between Hamas and UNRWA. We hear them again and again, but I think more broadly what we hear is that the whole population in Gaza is Hamas, therefore UNRWA is Hamas. And I think it's important to say that when there has been multiple allegations that we have tolerated tunnels under our premises, that we hire Hamas workers, etc. I think one clear example that comes to mind is when Sinwar was killed, and a passport photocopy of one of our teachers appeared next to him. Then immediately the allegation was that the bodyguard was an UNRWA teacher. And we investigated, and in less than 90 minutes, we found out that this was an expired passport and that the teacher had left Gaza at the beginning of the war and was living in Cairo with his family. This is just to reinforce the argument of what Ines has said, that there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation going on. But whenever that we have had allegations, and we have got very serious allegations, including the alleged involvement of UNRWA staff in the 7th of October terror attacks, I would say that these incidents have been investigated. And of course, what we cannot claim is, as a UN agency, is that we will have a police force or an intelligence services. We are not a government. We are a humanitarian agency. We rely on host governments like Jordan, Lebanon, including the state of Israel, to help us on when it comes to intelligence services to look into any potential infiltrations, whether it is illicit activities or terrorist attacks, etc. So it is not possible for us to do it alone. Whenever there has been allegations, we have investigated them. And in the case of these very serious allegations, it was not even UNRWA, it was the Office of Internal Oversight of the UN Secretary General. And of course, we have always requested the cooperation of Israel to do so. Zero tolerance to neutrality breaches doesn't mean that you have zero risk. We operate in high-risk environments, and this it is impossible in a workforce of 30,000 people to be able to mitigate all risks. Yet there has been independent investigations being carried out by former French Foreign Minister Colonna together with 3 Scandinavian institutes that eventually concluded that UNRWA systems, when it comes to mitigate the risk of neutrality breaches, is much stronger than any other systems of other UN agencies operating in Gaza or other humanitarian organizations. So just to say that we take these allegations seriously, and of course we encourage the government of Israel to cooperate with us. Could UNRWA cooperate with other agencies to re-establish trust? I think the answer is yes. We are already cooperating with other UN agencies, especially at the operational level in Gaza, in the West Bank, to deliver services. And we follow the standards of the UN and of our donors. And I think we have, to a certain extent, cross our own red lines as a UN agency in terms of, transparency, accountability, and what we have allowed as compared to other UN agencies. That's what I'm saying, as compared to other UN agencies, to provide the assurances that donors need to provide funding to UNRWA. But are these assurances enough? The answer is no. They will never be enough, because there is a political intent behind it. So it's because this is a political issue, no matter how many technical reassurances you provide, they are never going to be enough. So I stop there. Thank you.
Marta. We have Raja and then Ricardo. Raja.
Yeah, I just want to put it into a bit more context. I think there's 2 things that we shouldn't forget here. How this moment has allowed the confluence of 2 things. One is the historic demonization, increasingly demonization of UNRWA, but the historic attempt to delegitimize UNRWA by Israel, which we've talked about and we know about, and has become, has been very successful in many quarters. They convinced the United States administration twice to cut, specifically to target UNRWA. So it's not that this it's not to be considered lightly. On the other hand, that campaign was dovetailed, let's say, with what happened in the case of the 12 employees, and we know very well how it was utilized to defame not only all of UNRWA, but probably anybody working with UNRWA, etc. Now, let's remember, Hamas 20 years ago, won free, open elections, but got about 35% of the popular vote. In Gaza, even more. than the West Bank. Now, certainly, 15 years of harsh Hamas rule, 15 years of harsh Israeli blockade, and not an easy life certainly whittled that down. But I mean, Hamas is an integral. The point is that it's an integral part of Palestinian society. Now, not everybody who is Hamas is a Qassam commando, and not every elected official in local, for example, elected local government officials in Gaza are largely were elected on Hamas slates. But that doesn't mean necessarily that these people were ever Hamas members. And even if they were, the big question is, since when has Israel, I mean, Israel has only woken up to this. Israel spent 15 years containing Hamas, dealing with Hamas, trading with Hamas, allowing Hamas to be funded by through Qatari money, well aware of what was going on in Gaza, and now decides, because of its own, its opportune, this opportune moment to turn the story around and end up with illegal, turning UNRWA illegal, declaring it illegal in Israel. I mean, this is, extreme chutzpah, and I think it has to be dealt with as such, and not taken. I mean, I know the problems UNRWA is having, but they tried their best to investigations and the transparency and disciplinary measures, and reaffirming the code of conduct of employees, and more than that, despite that, they now have to face, working illegally, serving their population. So I just wanted to add that context, I think.
Thank you, Raja. Ricardo.
Yes, I have two quick comments. The first one concerns the recruitment of Palestinians and Palestinian refugees in particular by UNRWA. And this is a sort of a counter question to the anonymous attendee, who should not be shy because we are not anonymous speakers, so he could put his name, by the way. My point is, all the time when UNRWA recruits a Palestinian, he shares the candidatures with the Israeli authorities. So the question is the Shin Bet doing properly his job, or they are complicit in what is happening or has been happening? Second point, I would like...
So Ricardo, you mean, sorry, just one question. You mean that for my ignorance, I'm ignorant, so I want to, so every time that there is like a new employee, he needs or she needs to, Marta say no.
No,
Yes,
we share the list of names of all of our employees on a quarterly basis with the state of Israel, including the numbers, including locations. And we have enhanced the level of information ever since the 7th of October. And we have never been given feedback on these lists. So,
but you mean that, because you also mentioned this point, I mean, is it like to one of the way in which this issue could be solved is also by enhancing actually the cooperation between UNRWA and Israel security services?
Definitely, this is what I call shared responsibility.
Okay.
This is why I said that the UN, not UNRWA, but not any other UN agency, not in Somalia, not in Sudan, they would never have a police service or intelligence services to know to what extent, what do they do their employees outside working hours.
Back to Ricardo. Sorry.
Yeah, no, very simply, Marta, if you share the information about your employees, my question is still valid. What is the role of the Shin Bet? I mean, they know the Palestinians almost by person, with their system of let's say, of surveillance. Huh? So you think that the Shin Bet doesn't know? I mean, either they do not know, they don't want to know, or they don't do their job. This is my point to the anonymous attendee. The second point is to complement what Ines Abdelrazak has said on the UNRWA textbooks. Simply, UNRWA doesn't write the textbooks. for Palestinian children refugees. They are obliged to adopt the curricula of the host states, meaning in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza and the West Bank are the Palestinian Authority or the host government's official textbook that have to be adopted. Now, before the Colonna report, there has been 4 important reports by the US, by UK, by Germany, and I think one by the European Commission or a member state of the European Commission that inquired deeply into the textbooks. And all of those commissions came to the solution that there were not anti-Semitic issues related to the Palestinian UNRWA Palestinian textbooks. So just as a complement to Ines Abdelrazak intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Riccardo. So we have several other questions. I will try to, so the second question has been already addressed because it was still on links with Hamas. So I will go to the third, which is quite elaborated, so I will read it. So, there is, I mean, the person who asked the questions points out to a dilemma, no? So on the one hand, UNRWA is alleviating the humanitarian suffering, but at the same time, it's also, by its existence, absolving Israel of its legal obligation, responsibility as an occupying power. How an aid organization can navigate this ethical challenge? Who wants to respond to this? Marta, please.
Well, maybe a short answer to that. In fact, it's not UNRWA having this dilemma, it's the international community. So I just want to put the responsibility in the right place. UNRWA is simply there as long as there is no just and lasting solution to the Palestinian-Israeli issue. It is for the international community to come up to terms and resolve it. So, I think it's a non-dilemma to me, the issue of denying universal rights, and I have mentioned it. It's not about choosing rights. And in fact, I don't know which speaker said it, but we are a nexus between relief and human development. We have been doing it for decades. So in fact, we are safeguarding the enjoyment of fundamental rights of Palestinian refugees as long as there is no just and lasting solution. Over, thank you.
Thank you, Marta. The other question, it's about something that I think Raja mentioned about the expansion of the mandate of UNRWA. And Matilde, she's asking whether this expansion will be, if I understand well from the question, will come as a result of an action that UNRWA will take. And I think, Raja, you can...
I'll briefly address that, but Marta would obviously be able to precise, and probably Riccardo also, because of... no, our research, when discussing refugee perspectives on UNRWA financing, etc., did not suggest that the mandate should be touched, in fact, for reasons, because basically, it's because of the pre-October 7th existing attack on UNRWA. There were several questions about what has prompted it. I mean, it was not Biden that cut UNRWA, it was Trump that cut UNRWA in 2017 and has again reinstated the cut on UNRWA. So it's a very specific American administration that outlook that has led to the most recent US cut. Now, the Israeli, as we've said, referred to several times, the Israeli attempt to delegitimize UNRWA, as we also said, is not new, and it's taken different forms. As textbooks was pre-October 7th, 12 employees post-October 7th, and we'll be hearing more as we go on. The point is that I was making was that we do not need to broaden the mandate. Because the mandate has never really changed. It's in principle, relief works education, so et cetera, but the scale of services, as everybody knows, over 70 years has been reduced, and the works element was dropped by the 1960s, and then there are other things that have been scaled down, and so on and so forth, without the essential core services, on any of them being abandoned. So this is the moment, I'm saying, that we do not need a rewriting of the mandate, but we need an affirmation by the UNGA, of course, it would have to be, that UNRWA should, in addressing the forthcoming crisis in Gaza, can envisage a wider programming than even it was able to envisage prior to the war. That's because of the new tasks that fall upon the international community in relief and recovery in Gaza.
Thank you, Raja. Very quickly, we have actually a specific question from Lucia Goracci about the archive, audiovisual archive, which Lucia said that she visited. That she knew that UNRWA Audiovisual Archive was in Amman and in Gaza, but in a report that she was doing on the Nakba, she was told that most of the UNRWA video material is actually in Gaza. And if you, any of you knows actually if there is apparently this audio archives like 600,000 documents. If you have information about this archive, and Marta, yeah?
Well, I have to say that the archives are, I'm not sure about the audiovisual, but all our archives are safe. So that's what I can say, which is good news for the institutional memory of the Palestinians and Palestine refugees. And they should be preserved. And in fact, we have been doing quite a lot of work in the preservation and digitalization of Palestine refugee archives.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we have a fellow from Florence, my city, who is asking about UNRWA, why UNRWA is not present, if I understand well, in Egypt, or if it operates in Egypt, and to what extent. And I will combine this question to another question, which I think is making us busy, all of us, after Trump second term, about like what might happen after this administration, US administration has started this new mandate. I mean, I think already they extended the cut on funding. But I would like to elaborate more on this and say, I mean, I think that the Trump recent declaration actually suggests something that is beyond the issue of cutting funding, because when he mentions about Gaza becoming a Riviera, or I mean, I think that it's he touches on something that is about the the ability of the people to remain. That it seems that so I think that we have to really think about what are the steps that will be taken to discourage people to stay. In some way, these processes are more subtle than we think. So I think that this is a question for everyone. And I don't know if anyone, maybe Ricardo or Ines, if you want to weigh in. Ricardo, yeah, first. Please.
Yeah. Well, all the question of defunding UNRWA from the US, other possible states, this is simply corroborating the will of Netanyahu's government to do away with the Palestinians, to continue the forced displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza and from the West Bank. This is something that is not only contrary to international law, but is actually what we are talking about, because the reality is not to negotiate something for the Palestinian refugees in the mind of Trump, is simply to do away with them. Now, I would like to raise a point concerning some possible task for the international community. which is the fact that if we go back to the resolution 194, is the right of return and or compensation. There has been a number of works done in the 90s on the question of compensation to Palestinian refugees. I think that the question of compensation is extremely important. Why? Because first of all, if the descendants of the original families that were forcefully displaced would receive a compensation, this would signal that the international community is finally taking a step towards justice towards the Palestinians. And the compensation would have a cathartic effect. On top of that, and contrary to the Israeli propaganda, who fear the invasion of Israel by almost 6 million Palestinian refugees presently registered with UNRWA, the question is that we don't know at present what is the will and the intentions of the Palestinian refugees in the 5 fields of intervention of UNRWA. Meaning that I definitely think that a number of Palestinians from Lebanon and possibly from Syria would be happy to go back in some way or another to Palestine. But when you look at the Palestinian registered refugees in Jordan, for example, they are almost 2.54 million. Most of them have a Jordanian passport. They have been intermarrying with the Jordanian population. They have made up their own living there. Who really wants to go back? This point, we don't know. We don't have data that could comfort us in going one way or another. And it is extremely difficult to run a survey on the topic because the right of return is a taboo among Palestinian refugees. Everybody wants the right of return among the refugees, but nobody actually discusses its implementation. And I think that compensation should be thought as a way to begin a process of peace and international justice. In a recent booklet that I published at the end of November 2024, I have a section on the question of compensation for Palestinian refugees and how these could be profitable, but also accompany the question of when UNRWA will cease its own activities. Anyway, I could elaborate, but I don't want to take more time.
Thank you, Ricardo. Ines.
Thank you. You know, I would just like to take a step back because a lot of the conversation, and I see a lot of the questions frames again around like the idea that Israel has anything to do in Gaza. It doesn't. It's not. It's a de facto sovereign because they're occupying, but they shouldn't be there in the first place. And we're discussing, you know, Shin Bet, do they have information and so on? They shouldn't be there. And the Palestinian refugee, the Palestinians have been made refugees way before Hamas even existed. The Palestinians have been under occupation way before Hamas existed. And they've been denied return by a regime, by the state of Israel that has created policies and practices to prevent Palestinians from being, you know, from self-determination. And so the fragmentation we're seeing, whether it's political, social, geographical, of the Palestinians is man-made, and it is deliberate, and it is more than 75 years old. So I think that's I think the problem, because the moment that we're funneled and tunneled into having the conversation, whether who's hiding in UNRWA schools and not, it's legitimizing, again, like the Israeli policies that are effectively have been destroying an entire people, an entire territory, have been bombing all of the schools and the universities in the territory. This is what the conversation is about. And this is what the ICJ has reminded in its advisory opinion. And the advisory opinion is very clear, is that, you know, Israel should end its illegal occupation. It is unlawful. And the international community has many different legal, financial measures, material measures they should take. It's a legal obligation. It's just not just a moral one. So I think that we should push back a lot against falling into what the Israelis want us to talk about, you know, just to defend ourselves of we're not terrorists, we're not anti-Semitic. They are the colonizer, they are the occupiers. And I think UNRWA should also, you know, I think like UNRWA has to stand its ground. Like they exist for the reason that there is just simply not implementation of the right of return of the Palestinians, and that you know, the outrage should be around the fact that Israel finds it normal to bomb schools and just to destroy an entire UN agencies. And I think we live under an era. I will finish there.
No, I just wanted to add another question for you before you finish as well, because, and also to Raja, because there is a question about you, I mean, as two different I mean, two different generations. And I mean, the person, Mr. Atul is asking, is asking to, if you can address also what you think from a Palestinian perspective could have been done in a different way. And so just if you can integrate this answer in your
you can come back, Ines, after
Ines,
I was going to answer that. That's what I wanted to talk about,
Okay.
but we can talk.
Yeah.
I'm sure me and Ines will have good, the same different perspectives on that, but complementing each other. Look, you know, there's clearly misinformation. You know, we talked about misinformation. Obviously, this questioner is very poorly informed, because there's an assumption there that somehow we who actually history has in many of the history books shown are the victims of a long struggle with a settler colonial project are now being asked to, you know, what is your responsibility for this? Our responsibility for this is not being able to resist it and prevent it, and not being able to mobilize the international law that has been clear about what this is all about. Not only this current genocide, but occupation and illegal occupation, apartheid, and so forth. These are concepts which don't come from Palestinians. These are concepts which have been generated by the international community through the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council, the International Court of Justice. Now, if listeners now, because of, you know, the sort of world we seem to be living in, where anybody can decide they want to take another people's country, like Mr. Trump, or Israel can decide that because of the horrors it experienced on 7th of October, it can undertake a genocide against the people. Now, if that's the law of the jungle that you are advocating, then I'm not part of that. We insist on international law, and international law says that there are 7 or 5 or 6 million Palestinians, refugees or descendants of refugees, whose rights have to be taken care of sometime. When, how, by who, we don't know. And until then, we have UNRWA to at least make sure they don't die. I'm sorry, Ines, I didn't mean to preempt you, but
Ines, over to you.
Yes, the other point I wanted to make is related, is that I think the international system, the multilateral organizations like the UN as it exists now, which is the sum of its part, the sum of states that have come together, and with a Security Council controlled by 5 countries since World War II. I mean, the world has changed. And both the way that international law is built and implemented, and the institutions behind it are not equipped to deal with what we're dealing with right now, which is a world where you can invent facts and truth. We're like in a post-truth world where, again, like something like the entire ethnic cleansing and genocide of a people can be denied, facilitated, debated in comfortable places and conferences, whether it should happen or not. And this is a normal debate to have, whether we should be erased or not as a people. So I think that eventually, I think the institutions, including within the like European unions, and I think some states that are functioning with traditional diplomacy, are not realizing that we live in that world now, and I think we need to deal with that. And so I think that's where I think the discrepancy is, where we need to be much more forceful. There needs to be a more political, forceful approach to making sure that the world doesn't integrate that model. And Israel is championing that model together with Trump, together with other champions of that model, to completely destroy the international order as we know it, and be able again to do whatever they please. And we should take them seriously, because it sounds so insane, but it is effectively going to potentially can be implemented. And we're seeing it with the defunding of UNRWA and the very situation that UNRWA is in at the moment. It is possible. And so I think it's important to be able to recon with that. And from a Palestinian perspective, I do think that effectively, as Raja said, to be honest, like right now, the limitations is that the leadership that is officially representing the Palestinian people internationally first is not legitimate and is not confronting the occupation. It's part and parcel of that Oslo system that has been put in place, where we have local authorities that are enforcing the Israeli occupation instead of confronting it. And whatever in the past we have tried as method, nonviolent negotiations, UN, international law, going to courts, protesting in the streets, all of that has been met with zero implementation and forceful enforcement of, again, what should be our just simple fundamental rights. And so that's where we are here today with like people who, you know, like with we just need new methods or thinking politics and thinking how we do confront these injustices.
Thank you very much, Ines. And I think this last point that you raised also, yes, Mr. Atul actually addressed your point about the introspection, with that, I would like really to thank all the speakers for sharing with us their insights. I would like also to suggest that anyone who is actually interested in reaching out to them, please do let us know, because there is also mentions of research that has been published. I mean, I personally know about the research of Riccardo Bocco and also of Raja, but I'm sure also Ines can, will be able to share with you all the insights that any publication that can be helpful to inform this debate. And thank you very much again for joining today. I think it was actually very informative. As YAI, we support really the idea that it's very important to host such a discussion, to really hear from different viewpoints, but also invite people who actually have scientific expertise and can share with us the findings of their research. We do also work a lot on the Israeli-Palestinian issue and listen from all sides, and this you can, we always are ready really to listen from different sides. We engage with both also Israeli authorities and Palestinian authorities and civil society. And please do let us know also if this sort of webinar are helpful for you. I hope they are. For me, at least they are. Thank you very much for connecting, and keep also tuned with our activities. Thank you.